Hi everyone, James here from F9 Audio and the Freemasons, and welcome to video number 2 showing you the content and how to use the F9 toolkit for Logic 9 and Logic X. On this video we're going to hit up the bass patches, and one of the standout patches from me is this very carefully sampled Fender Precision from 1966. A live bass can only go up so far, so in the upper octaves of this patch we've got a whole series of slides and noises for you to add extra realism to your parts. Now, as you'll hear in a minute, these can make all the difference when you're programming a bass part. We've also sampled my trusty jazz that I've had from the Freemasons days and a Music Man's Stingray, the same type of bass that Bernard Edwards used from Chic. A few modern active basses round off this selection, but also we've got this brilliant selection of over-processed basses that will really add some funk to your production. Enough from me now, I'm going to let the basses do the talking. As you can hear, some great material in there, and we've not even gone through all of the patches, but it's time to move on, and we're going to have a look now at the 808 basses. Now, if you're on laptop speakers, you're only going to hear some weird clicks with this, so please switch over to some headphones or some studio monitors. Let me give you a brief demo of just one of the patches. Now, I don't know about you, but I've got a ton of 808 patches already that just seem to arrive with this shed load of sub that's almost totally uncontrollable and just sucks the living daylights out of your production. We've spent an awful lot of time with these 808 basses to make sure that the sub end is controlled. There's enough of it so you get that power, but there's still overtones so that you can hear the note if you want it. And most importantly, it doesn't just destroy whatever you're working on when you put them in. Now, these patches go from this kind of tone to this. So let me just play through a couple of examples from the cinematic startup page that comes with the deluxe edition. Now for something that I hope a lot of you are going to like, the Analogue bass patches. Now, as you may know, we've got a great collection of vintage analog synths in the studio, and we've sampled a lot of raw waveform collections to make these patches. Now, this means that we can actually do a lot of the synthesis work and the patch design inside of the ESX24, and you'll be surprised how much control we can get out of it. Now, I'm sure that's already sent a couple of analog purists running for the hills, but they may want to check out some of the tips at the end of this section, and certainly have a listen to some of the basses in action. And what better beat than a nice 80s one? So as you can hear, there's a great many number of tones in there. And don't forget, you've got full control within the ESX synthesis section. Then we wanted to take a different approach and actually sample some staccato bases using the envelope parameters that are in the analog synths and the filters, etc., etc. And the only way to do that really is to sample them round robin. So if you hit the same key a number of times, a different sample is going to trigger each time. Now that means the waveform's picked up at a different point, and that's where the beauty of analog comes in. So let's listen to those patches in action. Now, I'm sure you can hear on that, repeated notes of the same thing sound slightly different, so you've got a bit more of an analog feel. Now, it would be nice to get some of that going on the analog bass patches. Well, you can. What we've done within those analog bass patches that we heard earlier was loop them so that they sustain for as long as you hold the note down. Now, that can be useful in some circumstances, but the one thing that it does is it turns off the ability to change the start point within the matrix system. I've no idea why. It's one of the weird legacies of the ESX24. But if you come into the edit page of the ESX24 analog bass patches, view the loops so you can see the loops and turn all of the loops off, then something magical happens. The matrix modulation that we've already set up for the patches kicks in, and random LFOs modulate the start position of the waveform. Now that means it sounds more analog. The machine gunning is gone, and we can suddenly get great analog style patches out of samples of raw waveforms. Now this is a great tip if you're building your own patches and you're doing your own sampling. Just remember, keep the loops off and this kind of modulation will happen. So let's jump forward a few years now in bass history, and we're going to look at what are known as Reese basses. These are so-called after a very influential record called the Reese Project, and they're the kind of big stereo growly things that you hear filling up the bass spectrum and the lower mids in drum and bass records. We've created quite a few of them, and they're very much under control and can also be used with our 808 patches. So let's hear them in action. Now, with all of the F9 patches, it's just worth checking out the modulation wheel. Where appropriate, we've mapped that onto any parameter that we think it might be useful for. We've got two other bass categories left, but I've lumped them together in this house example and picked up a couple of highlights here. We've got an FM bass section which comes from the classic FM hardware. It's not software driven, it's from the actual machines, DX7s, TX802s, TX81Zs. We've got some weird old FM things like a YS200 here, this weird version of FM editing, but still very powerful. Then we've got digital basses that come from a variety of hardware sources and a little bit of layering as well. Let's hear them at play. Okay, so now onto the keyboard instruments, and first up we've got a grand piano patch. Now, it's nowhere as detailed or powerful as our Forte piano patch, but as you can hear there, it's a great general purpose piano sound, and most importantly, it's incredibly efficient. It's got bite and it's got some juice to it, and it's only coming in at about 400 or 500 megabytes, which is really useful when you're wanting to work quickly. We've got some variations on this patch. Grand piano going through a cathedral style reverb. Nicely band limited there as well, and a proper lo-fi. Okay, a house piano patch, much more bitey, much more fronty. Now onto the electric pianos. This is our first Rhodes patch, and it's really nice and mellow. Now, if you want a bit more bite, our second Rhodes patch has much more bell in it. A really useful patch now, Vinyl Rhodes, which has a loop of vinyl noise running along in the background. Really soulful, that patch, when you hit rich chords. Now, all of these sounds were sampled through an amp with a valve microphone, so there's already a degree of bite, but there's always room for a little bit more. This is our Dirty Rhodes patch. Next up is our Bandpass Roads patch, which is just when you want a Rhodes to really almost act as a pad within a track. Now moving over from tines to reeds, this is our amped Wurlitzer patch. And just to end this section off, here's our Wurlitzer patch with a rotor applied. So to round this video off, I'm quickly going to jump through the guitar patches. Now, I'm normally not one for multi-sample guitars because I don't think they capture anywhere near the emotion of the instrument, but there are some useful patches we certainly can make, like for example this stereo power chord. We do have a sustained guitar patch also, which is great for creating spread chords, but we've concentrated on the funky, muted pick sounds. Now, we've worked hard to make these patches really playable. It's very difficult to record this kind of guitar, particularly through an amp with a nice throaty sound, and to get them really working. But let's hear them in action. So that's it for this second video, and I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough. Don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series and all of the main audio demos that are on the product page. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.